Meeting of Lee County, and we're calling the meeting to order. Give us your thoughts on the affidavit.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Joe Adams with the County Attorney's Office. I've reviewed the affidavit publication and we're legal to proceed.
Thank you, Joe. Let's stand and say the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Whereas this is a public forum, this is an opportunity for anybody in the public that wishes to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here that wishes to share their thoughts on those topics? Next item of business is the approval of the minutes. And we have the minutes in your file. Do we have any comments or motions on that?
I make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The next item of business, we're going to change the order a bit. We have a CPA item that is, I think we'll be able to transact in a relative minor amount of time. And so we're going to move them up in the agenda, and then if staff doesn't mind, we'll attend to those other items.
Yeah, we're okay with that.
Thank you. All right, so for purposes of the record, we're now going to discuss CPA 2022-00012 Corkscrew Commercial Map Amendment. Amend Map 4B to add 11.4 acres to the Lee County Utilities future wastewater service area. Is the applicant ready to present? Thank you.
Good morning, members of the LPA. My name is Richard Aiken. I'm an attorney with Henderson Franklin here in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm here this morning on behalf of the applicant for CPA 22-000012, which is the Corkscrew Map Amendment. I also have our project planner, who's Margaret Imblage. She's here with me this morning, and she's going to make a brief presentation. We also have Bruce Lampett with Small Brothers here this morning, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have as we go through this. So first, I'd like to just point out the location of the property that's the subject of this plan amendment. You can see it outlined in yellow here. It's with frontage on Corkscrew Road. It's at the southwest corner of Alico Road and Corkscrew Road here. You can see it's just to the west of Corkscrew Shores. It's also to the east of Wild Blue, and then further out Corkscrew, you've got Verdana and FFD. The property that's basically down here to the south of the subject property is owned by a combination of Lee County and the South Florida Water Management District, so these properties down here in this general area. So the request here is to amend the Lee County Utilities Future Sewer Service Area map, which is map 4B in the Lee plan, to include the 11.4 acre property. All right, so what we're asking to do is just to amend the future sewer service area map so that we can have sewer service on the property. It's pretty straightforward. It's the only request before you. There are no other map amendments or text amendments that we're proposing. The sewer service lines are already in existence along the frontage of Corkscrew Road, so that's not an issue. They won't have to be extended to get there. The property is actually also already included in the Lee County Utilities Future Water Service Area map, which is map 4A. So it's already on the future water. We're just asking to add it to the future sewer service map. Staff does recommend transmittal of this amendment. I want to give you some brief history of the property here so you kind of understand how we got where we are today. In 1982, the property was rezoned. It was designated as community commercial zoning. It's somewhat unique in that fashion in that there's not a lot of other commercially zoned property in the southeast Lee County planning area. In 1982, there was also an approved variance that would permit an on-site sewage treatment plant here. So part of what we're doing here is adding it to the future sewer service area map so we wouldn't have the need to do that. In 2019, the applicant filed a map amendment that would add the property to do what we're doing today. It would have added it to both the future sewer service and the future water service area. There were some other things that the applicant was proposing to do as part of that proposed map amendment. That map amendment and that text amendment were transmitted by the board to the state, all right? Later, what happened was the applicant withdrew them, and the applicant withdrew them for other reasons that didn't have anything to do specifically with the request that's here before you today. The applicant was just sort of looking at changing its vision for the property, and so they withdrew those amendments at that time to kind of go back to the drawing board and rethink. And so as we're back here before you today, we only have this one change to make. In 2021, so in the interim, after that one was withdrawn, the county went ahead and initiated some county map amendments, which included adding it to the future water service area. So in the interim, that's happened, and it has been added to the future water service area. That was part of some updates to the 2045 planning horizon that the county did. And then also of note, in 2023, the property was the subject of a stipulated order of taking. The result there was that the county got fee simple interest and some frontage along Corkscrew Road to do some road widening. It also got a .43 parcel easement along the western portion of the property to do some drainage and other things that the county is going to need to do there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Embledge to go through a little bit of the planning background on the project.
Good morning. As Richard said, I'm Margaret Embledge. I'm the Director of Planning with LJA Engineering, and I'm a certified planner. And I'm going to quickly go through the appropriate comp plan policies that we are consistent with. Let me go. Whoops, where'd it go? It's still there. There we go. So as you can see on the screen and what was discussed also in the staff report is that this amendment would facilitate Lee Plan Goal 56 along with the various policies within that goal to bring sewer service throughout Lee County and to avoid having to have package plants or septic facilities in the county. So in addition to the proposed amendment, we also are consistent and will be consistent with the objective 33.1 and regarding the wellfield protection zones, that'll be addressed in the future when development does, occur. And so those are the main policies and goals that are applicable to this request, and they were found to be consistent. We were found to be consistent with these policies by staff. Just quickly, here is the proposed sewer service area map adding the subject property. And then here is the water service area that depicts the subject property already in that service area. And putting it in perspective, as Richard had already mentioned previously, this area is developing. There's a number of existing and approved projects that either will need or do have this service. And just quickly, here's the zoning. Property is zoned community commercial. It has industrial to the north and residential and mixed use plan development along with ag. And then the future land use map, the designation is wetlands, although there are almost half of the property is uplands, so any future development will create a change to the property from all wetlands to partial wetlands and partial DRGR. Lee County Utilities provided a letter May 15th, 2024, stating that they have adequate potable water and sanitary sewer available to the subject property. We had a public information meeting, and I will say that it's challenging to find a location in this southwest Lee County area. We found a place on Bonita Beach Road, and it was advertised as required, and the have any attendees from the public. Done there, and I'm going to let you wrap it up.
Thanks, Margaret. All right, so just to wrap it up, the request is consistent with the Lee plan, and staff found it to be such in its staff report and does recommend transmittal. As Ms. Embledge said, pursuant to policy 56.1.7, the proposed amendment will allow for the use of public sewage in lieu of septic systems in this portion of Lee County, southeast Lee County, and it will allow for potential development in the future to hook up, which is consistent with the Lee plan's goals and objectives. We would request a recommendation of transmittal to the Board of County Commissioners. Happy to answer any questions you have about the request that we have here before you, but that's all we have.
Richard? Questions?
Yeah.
Ray?
Given the fact that the county grabbed 25 feet of frontage from you along Corkscrew Road and zone commercial, with the commercial setback requirements and the loss of the 25 feet, is the project still viable as a commercial development?
So I believe it is. There are a couple of issues, as you may know. The county has, in the Land Development Code, Section 116 allows for some administrative deviations as a result of takings that allow us to get some administrative relief from some of the setback requirements and other things. So we're exploring that with the county. Exactly what's going to go on it at this point as far as commercial development, it may be a little bit challenging, but we're working through that with the county, and we do believe it is still viable, yes.
Has the county had any conversations with you regarding what happens when Corkscrew Road goes to 6 lanes in front of your site?
I don't believe so. Certainly not with me.
You had a public meeting. How was the meeting? You said it was advertised. Were mailings provided?
Mark?
It was advertised per the Lee plan requirements. It was advertised in the newspaper. It's not required to have mailings to adjacent properties.
Okay, I'm just curious. I live next door to you, or not next door, I live in the development, and I don't recall any conversation about it. Whenever there's something like that going on, somehow it gets to me, I didn't see it.
Okay.
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you, Ray. Any others? Ray, any other questions?
No.
Dustin?
I have questions.
Just a curiosity, in 2021, under the county-initiated map amendment that brought in the future water service, why wasn't the sewer service part of that amendment?
So I've talked about that with the county a little bit. I think that there were several reasons, and I think the county has indicated that Mr. Nathan Beals with LCU is back there and that he has the answer to that question. So if I could defer that to him.
Mr. Beals?
Hi, good morning. Nathan Beals, Lee County Utilities. So when the map amendments were being done, we were cleaning up 4A with some other areas of our service areas that weren't included, and it's a lot easier for people to connect to a pressurized water main for a water service. And when we didn't, so we added a lot of service areas, a lot of parcels that are fronting our water mains, but then when it comes to pressurized force mains, sewer mains, we don't want to force people to connect to those unless they want to, and so that's why we didn't do it for the sewer maps.
Interesting. It wasn't a gravity sewer in front of that parcel at that time.
In 2021, there wasn't?
There's still not gravity sewer in front of that property.
It's all force main.
Any other questions, Don?
No, thank you.
I have some questions. In 2019, the applicant had an approval and submitted to the state, and you had explained that they had changed their vision, and then in the overview, I see that there was an amendment in 2022 that amendment was approved and then withdrawn, and not approved but withdrawn in 24. Can you give me any color or narrative on those rather unusual happenings?
Yeah, so a couple of things. As you may be aware, there's a lot going out there in Southeast Lee County with regard to the DRGR and commercial development, some of the changes with regard to settlement agreements that have occurred in that area. And as the applicant was going in, it was trying to figure out how it might need to amend the Lee plan in order to allow for the commercial development that it was looking at. And as it sort of relooked at what it wanted to do, it decided that it no longer needed to go through some of those amendments at that time, right? And so as we looked at everything, after the amendment to the future water service, the only thing that's really needed at this point to kind of move forward is the addition to the future sewer service map. So that was really all it was that the developer, there was some delay and there was a lot of different discussions about what they were going to do. It was just on the developer's end of not needing to go through that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion? Anyone care to make a motion about CPA 2022-0012?
There's no staff presentation.
Yeah, sure. My bad.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that very sincere and overwhelming welcome. I appreciate it. All right. All right, so for the record, Joe Saraceno from the Community Development Planning section discussing CPA 2022-00012 Corkscrew Commercial Map Amendment. This is an amendment to add approximately 11.4 acres to Lee Plan Map 4B. The initial advertisement that went out showed 12.1 acres. That language was written prior to the order of the taking, so it should be 11.4 is the acreage that we're looking at. On the screen is the proposed future sewer service areas. It's just east of the Corkscrew Shores subdivision, which is on map 4B. And then map 4B resumes approximately 1.5 miles east to serve the place. North, there's an IPD for a mining operation. And then south, as discussed, is South Florida Water Management District, Lee County owned land. Consistent with Objective 17.3, the applicant held an advertised public meeting on February 15th, 2024. The utilities usage will enhance groundwater protection consistent with Objective 33.1 as well as Objective 63.1. The amendment helps the county follow Goal 56 to provide sewer throughout Lee County, and the property is located within the 1 year and then as 5-year and 10-year by default wellfield protection zones. This amendment is consistent with the surrounding properties. The Lee County Utilities has provided a letter showing that sewer capacity is available to serve the property. Level of availability of other public services will be analyzed with future submittals. The Board of County Commissioners has previously transmitted a similar amendment. This amendment is consistent with the Lee Plan, and staff recommends that the board transmit the amendment as proposed in Attachment 1. How's that?
Spectacular.
Thank you.
Now, would anyone care to make a motion or otherwise on this item?
I'll make a motion to recommend transmittal of CPA 2022-000112 as presented.
Thank you, Don. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dustin. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. We're now moving to agenda item number 4. And I liken this to like trying to separate paint. There's just a big bucket and a lot of colors that got thrown into the bucket, and I'm not sure how to separate all that, but it was meaningful and it was really helpful, and I very much appreciate the stated objectives and the staff's work on doing this, trying to understand these diverse items. Does staff have a plan in mind here? Do they? I can't imagine that we're going to do these one at a time. Or,
Anthony,
Can I point back to them and they can decide?
Anthony, how would you like to do this?
For the Record, Anthony Rodriguez, zoning manager. Mr. Chairman, I would say it's at the LPA's pleasure. I will let you know that this is the last stop for this group of amendments in terms of the committee review process. The two prior committees took this item by item. Each item is about 1 page of substantive actual changes. There are some additional pages for context where appropriate. Our preference would be to continue that. So take each item separately, and we'll ask for a motion in a second. I apologize to Jennifer because this is the second time she's heard this spiel because she sits on the LDCAC as well. So our amendments this morning are focused in 3 topic areas: development services amendments, code enforcement amendments, and continued cleanup. We have, as you can see, a variety of staff here to act as subject matter experts, introduce the amendments, answer any questions from the LPA. That's my introduction. I'm going to turn it over to Joe Adams. Joe Adams is from the County Attorney's Office. He's going to handle the changes to the plating code pursuant to Senate Bill 812, and then we'll continue in succession from there and take each item separately.
All right, we can proceed according to that plan. Thank you.
Any questions before we start?
I have no questions. Any other members at this point?
Okay. Joe?
Chairman, is there, if I cover it from here?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So the plating amendments were drafted by our office as a result of Senate Bill 812, which basically this Florida legislature did an overview and a rewrite of the plating regulations that are going to be required statewide for every local government in Florida. So taking a look at it, it basically broke down it's a 2-step process now. You have a preliminary plat application and review and approval, and then a final plat approval process. The way that they wrote the legislation is when you get your preliminary plat approval, developers are able to go in and start pulling building permits and beginning to build out the development. When you get the final plat approval, that's when you get your certificate of occupancy for the building. So looking at the county's plating regulations, we were already fairly in line with what the state did, but we did need to make some changes to be consistent. So that's what we did, and if you have any specific questions about the changes, I can address them.
So members of the LPA, I have questions on a lot of these items, and we can either try to address these as we go or collectively address them after they're done. I'm happy either way. Do you guys have a preference since it's so convoluted?
I think you do it as we go.
All right. Is that good? All right. So does anyone have any questions about this particular item?
Yes.
Good. Ray?
All right. For a number of years, I've been looking for a definition between a preliminary plat and a final plat. And the way I'm reading this, the difference is with a preliminary plat, you can pull building permits. But does that mean that that preliminary plat is recorded? Because it would have to be. Because I can't pull a building permit without a strap number or an address. So if it's recorded, then it's not a preliminary anymore, it's a final. And the reason I bring it up is because I've been arguing with the county for a number of years on why a preliminary plat is a requirement of a development order. Because it's way too early to provide that information as far as the developer would be concerned, as far as I'm concerned. But getting back to your modifications, is a preliminary plat recorded? And if so, then there is no preliminary.
It is not recorded.
It is not recorded.
No.
Well, how do you pull a building permit?
That's what the legislature said, that you can pull a building permit once you get preliminary plat approval. I did some research and made some calls around to other local jurisdictions to kind of see, like, why did this happen? Why are we dealing with this? And my understanding is that some other jurisdictions besides Lee County had some review processes for plat approval where you basically had everything done, but then they had to go to 2 public hearings before the Board of County Commissioners. And they were having issues with their clerk of courts. They would submit the plat to be recorded, and it would take them a month to record the plat. and the developers were dealing with those sorts of issues. So this is what the legislature did to deal with those sorts of issues, which we weren't really having in Lee County because we don't do that.
But without a recorded plat that creates the parcel for the lot, I'm missing something. I don't understand how it works. Because why would I give a third-party builder the right to build on my property that encumbers all of the land, that has the ability to put a lien on all of the land? The land is mortgaged, then you got to get a lender in. I don't understand.
Hi, good morning. For the record, I'm Odette Kleiman. I'm the section manager for development services. To kind of answer your question, there is a difference. The preliminary is not recorded. However, it is sufficiency of the plat. So you couldn't pull building permits right when you submit for the plat. You would still need to be found sufficient. The final plat is essentially your Mylars, which do get recorded. So you can pull building permits once you are found sufficient of your plat submittal, and then you can record once you've provided your Mylars.
And I understood that in reading this, but we're coming around full circle. When someone goes to pull a building permit and the building department says, what's the strap number, what's the address? The county, and I don't know your department, the county that assigns house numbers won't assign it until the plat's recorded. And you can't get you won't have a strap number because a plat hasn't been recorded. So I'm still unclear on how you can pull a building permit.
And that might be something that we'll need to look into with the building department to see how we can make this Senate bill actually acceptable.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Excellent. Anything else?
Yep.
Dustin?
You touched on mine.
So I have a question here. In 10.10-15426, it talks about assurances of completion improvements. And if I'm reading this correctly, that for all off-site improvements prior to commencing any off-site or on-site development, assurance of completion of the development improvements for on-site will be required. And then it describes those assurances as a surety, or cash performance bond, or other types of security. And the question that comes to my mind is, that's probably not so much an issue for a developer as it is for an investor. So let's say the investor goes in, he acquires the property, he goes through these processes, but his destination is not to be the one that actually puts the shovel in the ground. It is to entitle the ground so that he can then sell it to a developer. And he can't do that if he has to put up guarantees for the performance of the on-site, off-site work prior to getting the plat approval or the pre-approval. So how can the investor get the approval so that he can give assurance to the developer that what he's selling is actually bona fide and approved without having to put up bonds for millions of dollars that is never his destination to execute? How do we do that?
So I think part of the answer to that is with the new preliminary plat approval. I mean, that is basically your final plat approval. You can start pulling building permits, right? And so if there's a timing issue with the surety, there's nothing requiring the developer or the investor to go ahead and get the preliminary plat approval. I mean, they could time that how they need to. This statute specifically requires the infrastructure surety to be in place when you get the preliminary plat approval, because then that's when the building starts.
Which is the problem. Because you need the preliminary plat approval to attest to a subsequent developer that what the rights you're conveying are vested and approved. But I can't get the preliminary plat approval unless I put up a surety for the improvements. That doesn't work. The preliminary plat approval should be able to be bequeathed without the investor having to commit through a guarantee or otherwise that those improvements will be funded. That's not his position. His position is to entitle the property to then sell it to a subsequent investor so entitled, which happens all the time. So I see that as a problem in how this is organized. So does Senate Bill 812 mandate that those guarantees be in place to secure a preliminary plat approval, or is that a local edict?
It does. The Senate bill requires it. And, in our code, that's another thing we looked at one of the other committee meetings, is our code speaks to 110% and of the costs for the surety, and the Senate bill actually requires 130%. So that's something we're also needing to look at to be consistent with the state law.
All right, then there goes the problem. Again, back around full circle. You're calling it a preliminary plat. The preliminary plat, again, Odette, is when I have to submit the DO to you. That DO is probably months before the first shovel goes in the ground because the actual improvement construction, the LCU construction plans haven't been developed yet at the DO stage. But you're looking for a preliminary plat early. What has always happened, or what we've done today, is we give you a preliminary plat that's not signed, that shows you the borders of some of the lots that we're going to do within the development order. The development order could be 600 lots. The final plat may only cover 50 lots. We submit the deal, gets approved. We design the Lee County utility drawings, gets approved. We hire the contractor, get as much of the improvements in as possible to try to decrease the value necessary for the surety. The surety is provided when I submit, okay, we're about ready to start selling lots. We need the plat recorded to create the lots, get the strap numbers, get the house numbers, get the building permits. Submit the plat, it's approved. At that time, we provide you with the surety bond, decreasing it by whatever on-site construction's been CC'd, and then we record the plat and we start selling off lots. But if you're saying it's the surety is required upon preliminary plat approval, to be honest, I've never gotten anything that's documented that says preliminary plat is approved. It's just a tag-along document with the DO. In my opinion, it's been a file stuffer for the DO because no one is constructing lots off of that preliminary plat.
So if I could speak to that, I think the distinction is we're talking about preliminary plat submittal, where you're going to submit your first application, and then preliminary plat approval. The surety is not required upon preliminary plat submittal. It's required prior to preliminary plat approval. And I think the best way I can explain this is the way that we've looked at this is the preliminary plat is really, you have everything done. You have everything that's required on the plat is there. Everything's in place. It comes down to the recording issue. The only difference between the preliminary plat approval and the final plat approval is getting the signatures on the Mylars and having it recorded with the Board of County Commissioners. So if you can think about it in that way, your preliminary plat approval is almost like the way we handle it now, your final plat approval. There's just a couple extra steps that happen at the end for your final plat approval.
To make that work, then what we would believe then a preliminary plat is a placeholder when submitted with the DO. And when we're ready to submit the final plat for selling lots, we may update that preliminary placeholder.
I think it's a good way to
final preliminary plat review.
I think it's a good way
to record
explain it. Yeah, and basically, if you don't provide the surety and your preliminary plat is in for review, and you have all your ducks in a row, but you don't provide the surety, then it's just going to sit there and wait and wait and wait. And then once you provide the surety, if that's the last step, then you can get your preliminary plat approval. You can start pulling building permits, and then there's the extra step of getting the final plat approval just to get the Mylar signed and have it recorded.
Making progress.
Okay. How does the investor represent to the developer that the preliminary plat has been approved without having to put up a surety? when the DO is approved, is that inclusive of the plat as presented? And then the preliminary plat approval is another step?
From a, I mean, there must have been some discussion up in Tallahassee about the investment side of this, because this statute specifically says upon preliminary plat approval, you can go under contract to buy a lot, but you cannot convey a lot until you've had final plat approval, recording in the public records.
So Brandon and you guys were making some physical communication. You want to explain that?
Actually, Joe covered it perfectly.
I just think we're going to have to look at our processes. It's just a communication that we're going to need to look at our process.
I think when it all shakes out, it's going to be what we've done traditionally anyhow.
So if the DO is approved and the plat is a component of the DO,
As a placeholder,
the investor can sell to the developer with assurance that that number of lots as configured is approved by the county,
Correct.
which is different than a preliminary plat approval.
I guess I don't understand. Because I, like Joe said, is that we don't want to confuse submittal with sufficiency. So there is an assurance because your plat has been deemed sufficient. It's just all that's waiting on are just the minor submittal items that you can actually then sell the lot.
I understand the dichotomy between final and preliminary. What I don't understand is, when is that surety bond required? Is it required when the DO is approved?
No.
Does the DO show the plat, though it's not by definition a preliminary plat approval?
The plat will, or sorry, the development order will show a plat case number, showing that it has been submitted in order for the development order to get issued.
here's what's happened in the past. I submitted a deal. At that point in time, the deal was 600 lots, just using a number. The plat for the DO stage may only show 100 lots, and it's a placeholder for the DO stage, and we start our construction. Then we determine, by the time when we're ready to start selling lots, maybe that 100 lot plat isn't what I want at that time. I may take it 50, I may make it 150. I make changes to the placeholder plat, and then I submit it to the county. This is the final preliminary plat. The county reviews it, it's fine. I'm ready to sell lots. When I submit that for county review with the intent to record, I've got to provide all the documentation with the surety.
Correct.
And again, as far as I'm concerned, that's months past when the DO was approved.
So I think a lot of this is just really wordsmithing. I don't think our process is going to change from what it is right now. It's just when Ray said, I'm going to submit this for recording, it's now going to be, I'm going to submit this and provide the surety for preliminary plat approval.
As long as the bonds don't have to, you don't start paying the tariff on the bonds at the point that you have fully approved DO and a plat, then that would not be problematic. But if the bonds have to be, or some sort of surety has to precede that, that's a problem. And I don't know how that meshes with 812. And I know we don't want to be here all day, and we've kind of spent a lot of time on this, but as the staff, what Ray brings and what I'm bringing are real issues in the market that have negative consequences if not processed as we've discussed. So don't know really how to say it any differently. Maybe nobody wants to be the bleeding edge, but maybe this is going to happen, and then we'll have to figure that out. So, any further discussion? All right. Next item, 4A2.
Did you want to make a motion on the item separately, or were you going to make a motion at the end?
Yeah, we probably should do it independently since there's a lot of stuff in here. So in regards to the plating code changes to be complicit with Senate Bill 812, do I have a motion?
Would we make a motion as presented, or as staff may amend?
I think we could make the motion as we want it to be, not as just as presented. I think you bring excellent input here, and I believe mine is also valid, and it needs to be in the public record beyond just notes.
Again, my whole concern, and we've had this discussion before, it's as it's described in the DO. So maybe there's a modification in the DO that says a placeholder plat has to be submitted. I think that would make things, I think it would clear things up better. If that makes sense to you guys.
That's fine with me.
And that's the recommendation I make.
So for Janet's ability, can we clean that up?
Division 2 development orders.
Item 4A1, plating code changes. I thought you were going to.
I was stopping there, fill in the blanks. As amended. I recommend approval as amended with modifications to the development order language, better describing a preliminary plat as a placeholder at the development order phase.
Might I append to that?
Please.
And prior to the necessity of a bond or a surety being in place. Do you have that, Janet? Yes. Okay. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 4A2, Chapter 10, deviations dumpster size reduction.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Odette Kleinman with the Development Services Section Manager. I'm bringing up item A2 to go over deviations that are commonly brought up, specifically solid waste. So we've made adjustments to the table to accommodate compactor use for multifamily, just so that there can be a separation between garbage collection square footage and recycling collection square footage. Another change that we have also indicated in here are the recognition of minor warehouse. Particularly, we have a lot of storage units that come in, and they commonly request deviations to reduce the size of the dumpster requirements to only account for the office square footage rather than the overall building. So in this case, we are allowing just recognition of that office square footage to be utilized for dumpster calculations.
Thank you.
Any questions on item A2?
Questions, anyone? The only thought I have is, are there any other uses to which this could be useful other than those that are just called out in this application? Have you thought of other possibilities?
Those are the more common uses that come in for the deviation. I don't know off the top of my head of other uses that have come in commonly for reduction in dumpsters, but I'm open up to any other uses.
All right, thank you. I have none in mind, just while we're doing this, that is a nice improvement. Anybody from LPA?
I think, to your comment, a deviation would be easier to get by having this for the mini warehouse use. You would say, this use is similar to mini warehouse, so it kind of leads a pathway a little bit easier for those other uses.
Like open storage it comes to mind, where, and maybe it's already there, but they don't really generate cardboard, and I don't know if that's a use that we want to include in this, but I do open storage. I have that experience with it, so I would offer that as an additional by right.
There is no building actually allocated for it,
Correct.
so there would be no dumpster
Okay, so a building is what triggers that.
square footage, yes.
All right, having no further discussion, do I hear a motion on 4A to A?
I'll make a motion to approve as proposed.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Don. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. 4A3, minor change limitations.
So I will cover A3 as well. This one is a very quick, straightforward revision to the LDC. Currently, LDC interpretation is that there is a limit on minor change requirements. We are proposing to strike through that and allowing for unlimited number of minor changes as long as they meet the definition as to the number of reviewers that allocate for a minor change versus an amendment.
Discussion? Motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as proposed.
Second?
I'll second.
Second. Further discussion? In favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, moving along to A4. A4 is more so just to recognize common LDOs that come in limited development orders. Particularly, we have development orders that come in for redevelopment sites that are vacant for over a year. We want to recognize within the LDC that those should come in as a type D limited development order. Another change is that we recognize that type A limited development orders cap at 100 square foot added impervious. We are proposing to increase that to 200 since we commonly see sheds that come in for uncommon element that are exceeding that 100 square feet. So we are just proposing to increase that to 200.
Perhaps I'm seeing 2,500.
On type A LDOs,
Okay,
you'll see the strike through 100 to 200.
thank you. Okay. Any discussion? Motion?
Motion to approve A4 as presented.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I'll second, Janet.
Thank you.
And for item A5, I'll actually turn it over to Rob Price.
Good morning, Rob Price with DOT. Item A5 has been the subject of lots of discussion through the EROC and LDCAC process. So I was going to introduce it, but I will tell the LPA that we are planning to pull this before we go forward with approvals to the board in response to the questions and the concerns that have been raised at the other committees. But we wanted to give you the same opportunity that those other committees had to comment on the changes. The intent of item A5 was to acknowledge when FDOT does not provides a waiver, basically, when they provide a waiver from constructing a bikeway or sidewalk in the right-of-way adjacent to your site. Obviously, the state is the final authority on those roads. And so we were simply adding that to the fee and lieu process to acknowledge that waiver so that we could move forward with accepting that. The concerns that we've received are, basically, why are we having to pay a fee in lieu if the state's telling us that we don't have to build a sidewalk? So we understand those concerns, and we're going to come back to you with another change to this particular section. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those, or you want to wait until we come back.
Questions, anyone?
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Yep.
So 4A5 is withdrawn. 4A6.
Yep, so that's us again. So A6 is simply to address some issues with the land development code where we called out specific types of pavement that are no longer in service. So we wanted to take out the specific details related to asphalt. We also are amending our cross-section tables to incorporate the general interchange in the urban section that wasn't included before.
I am curious what type S1 and type S3 product are that are no longer available?
Yeah, they're not market available any longer.
What are those materials?
It's asphalt. So you mean what are the replacements?
No, the materials that are in short supply, what are they?
S1 and S3 version asphalt is no longer marketed and sold by asphalt companies. They use Superpave and other types of asphalt. So we're taking out the specific reference to a type of asphalt so that it can be more generalized.
Questions? Discussion?
Motion to approve A6 as presented.
On page 2 of 9, and it shows it twice. In the column of shared streets and bicycle boulevards, and maybe I'm just misreading it, it states in the column structural course, 6-inch Portland cement concrete or 1-inch asphaltic concrete. It just as an either or, it just seems you can use 6-inch concrete or an inch of asphalt.
Yeah, that's what it says. We can look at that.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Anything else? Thank you for the asphalt education here today. Don, did you have a motion?
Yeah, I had made a motion to recommend approval of A6 as presented.
Further discussion? Or second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. A7, bicycle parking design.
So that'll go back to me. With the bicycle rack design, currently the LDC limits the design capabilities for bicycle racks to a single U-shaped bicycle rack. This change will allow for more flexibility to allow more of what I would call the S-design bicycle racks, seeing as that has been a common submittal design for bicycle racks.
And it really just opens it up, doesn't limit it to one or two designs, it's whatever's.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Any questions for staff?
One comment on section 3B, number 1, in your strike through, shouldn't, and the third line, must be struck through also.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Does it must be struck through also? The sentence doesn't read right. Accommodates adequate space for the required number of bicycles must be measuring a minimum. Wouldn't it just be measuring a minimum of 36 inches?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then new item number 2, where you're saying stabilized all-weather materials. Does stabilized mean stone and dirt, or no? That's not your intent.
Securely mounted.
Okay.
There are some freestanding designs that have come through. We have not approved those particular designs because we're in Florida, we're prone to hurricanes, and we don't want bicycle racks flying around.
To Ray's point, at Bunch Beach, there are bicycle racks that are in some sort of a gravelish type setting, and would that be considered stabilized?
I would agree to that, yeah.
Okay. All right. Any further questions? Thank you. Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion. Recommendation for approval.
4A7, any further discussion? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Now discussion. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you. 8.
Item A8 is regarding the access width, particularly with EMS services and emergency services. We tend to see a lot of fire stations coming in with exceeding that 35-foot minimum access width to allow for a maximum not to exceed 80 feet for those. We've also used this to better identify maximum width of being the throat width, because sometimes driveways include that flare at the property line and they always exceed that 35 feet. So this will better define that the throat width cannot exceed the 35-foot width.
Right?
Is throat a defined term? It's
Not-
like an odd.
It is not. That was actually brought up in one of the other committees.
Got into that in the LDCAC for quite a while, and it's kind of nebulous.
But it is a very common term.
I have a question. What about usage on, if it requires a circular driveway because it fronts a major thoroughfare?
Can you repeat again?
Yes. If it's a circular driveway because it meets a major thoroughfare, are there separate width requirements for that? Or is it in total 35 foot?
They would be accounted separately.
Okay. Each driveway?
Each driveway would have to meet the minimum. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Or sorry, maximum. Minimum and maximum.
Any other questions for staff? A motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as proposed.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are now in item 4B, code enforcement amendments. This is the young man taking the podium, sir.
My name is William Diaz. I'm the code enforcement manager. I'll be presenting items B1 and B2. Excuse me, starting with B1, this is in reference to our land development code that mirrors the unsafe building abatement code, which was established in, I'm gonna emphasize this, 1985, and has not been updated since, okay? The idea behind Chapter 3, that addition under Chapter 3, you'll see there, is to mirror our land development code that allows us to post the notice of violation in a conspicuous area in the right-of-way in front of the structure to satisfy our legal obligations of notice to the property owner. This allows us to confirm that notice was given regarding that unsafe building, and hopefully opens up an avenue of communication, because this building code that was, again, established in 1985 and has not been amended since, only requires certified, the notice of violation is sent via certified mail. If they don't accept it, then we've got no notice and we can't advise them of their requirements of abatement. So that's it in a nutshell. Any questions, comments, concerns?
My CB1 is unsafe building abatement code. So that's a separate item. Is that, you're going to deal with penalties and liens thereafter?
Yes, sir. That is a separate item. B2 is the penalties and liens, which is a separate item,
under
separate land
B1,
development code.
Do you have any questions for the staff?
Do not.
All right.
Motion to approve B1 as stated.
Thank you, Don. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dustin. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. B2, sir.
For B2, penalties and liens, the short answer is we are raising the daily fine amounts to mirror the state statute. Our admin code and land development codes were much less than what the state statute outlines. This is a simple strike through under Land Development Code 2-427A1. You'll see the monetary amounts there. 250, 500, 5,000 are going to be changed to 1,000, 5,000, and 15,000 respectively. Those numbers reflect the daily fine amounts for an initial violation, a repeat violation, or a violation that the hearing examiner finds irreparable or irreversible in nature, respectively, for those monetary amounts. It's going to mirror state statute 162.09 that allows for those daily fine amounts for any unincorporated county areas that are larger than 50,000 residents. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I'll go to LPA before I offer mine. Justin, anything?
Yeah, what's the designation of the fine amount? Is that to the discretion of the code enforcer, or is that just the? Yep.
It's the hearing examiner. State statute actually outlines 4 specific criteria that they take a look at. They consider when making their decision, and it's the hearing examiner that actually makes the decision on the monetary fine amount, the daily fine amount.
Got it. Okay.
And for the record, there was a question in one of the other committees, if this will affect the lien mitigation process that we do have that ultimately reduces the daily fine amount. Once it's abated, those daily fines are stopped. This does not affect that lien mitigation program. Okay. That is still in effect, and the procedure will not be changed based on this.
Anyone else? Because the state allows it doesn't mean that it's a good idea. And it's my input that these sums are punitive. They're contrary to the objective, which is to cure the violation. And oftentimes these violations are initiated not by the owner to whom the violation gets assessed, but by the tenant. And the tenant, your ability to influence the tenant is greatly hampered unless it's for lack of payment. So the owner's ability to cure is very limited, and therefore the party creating the violation is not the party being assessed. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, I go back to when the Prima Luce was the downtown Sheraton, and over a series of ownerships, it got into the ownership of a foreign national.
Yes, sir.
And those fines would accrue, and they were prohibitive to actually curing the problem because they became cost ineffective and a problem not only in the title but also in the amounts to actually remedy the solution. And I don't know of this which you speak, the lien mitigation, but I do know and have gone through these appeals, which is why they're more familiar to me, and I believe that this is contrary to the objective if the objective is to remedy the violation. Therefore, I would ask that simply because it's permitted, that it not be elevated to these draconian amounts, and a $15,000 whack per violation, just excessive. So I would propose that these amounts be reduced by at least 50% of what the state allows, which is significantly greater than what had been allowed, and that they be capped. Again, we can make our own, it's local government, they be capped at not to exceed 50%, 60% at tops of the assessed value of the property. Because if you get into those kinds of ranges, basically you get people to just throw their hands up and go, I'm done. You know, I can't sell it for what it's worth, and I can't afford to remediate these, and the time to do that, and the ability to get a tenant to stop their violation, it's virtually impossible.
And the idea behind the lien mitigation process is to assist the property owner with that. There are different variables that we consider when negotiating the fine amounts down. Unfortunately, the assessed amounts, like hearing cost, we can't. Now, those are minuscule compared to the daily fine amount. You're talking $285 compared to daily fines that go on for who knows how long. I've seen them up to, I've seen them in a very large number, but I've also seen them, reduced down significantly. So there is room for negotiation with the daily fines amount. Now, you spoke of the Prima Lucia structure down there. That's within the city limits of Fort Myers, and I don't know if they have a lien mitigation process. I truly don't. But I do know that ours is relatively successful in negotiating it down, helping property owners out. I've done so myself. I've worked with other attorneys with their property owners and negotiating them. Like a property that they inherited is another one that we, unknown heirs of, and then all of a sudden a sibling or a child, the daughter or son, they get this house that have been running daily fines for years, and we work with them. I mean, I understand. We understand the scenarios that, that come with it. So it's definitely something that we consider when reducing it.
I understand, and I don't refute that process exists, but these amounts are excessive.
Okay.
So it is my opinion that those amounts should be diminished by 50% of the proposed, and there needs to be a cap of 50% of the value of the property.
Okay.
So that would be my recommendation. And Joe, I'm not completely clear, but as the chairman, I don't know that I'm allowed to make a motion.
You can make a motion. I would just add, if that's okay, quickly.
Please.
Mr. Diaz, if you wouldn't mind addressing kind of why we're doing this at this point. It has to do with certain commercial properties in the county where basically when you get to the fine amount, they're treating it as just the cost of doing business. They're making so much money that they're like, okay, $500 a day, $250 a day, whatever it is, we'll just pay it, and it's creating a lot of issues. So, Mr. Diaz, I don't know if you want to address that.
I would like to add to that, and I wasn't sure, and I apologize, I wasn't sure if I could bring it up, the specifics, but since I can, what we're finding a lot more recently is folks running their business from a residential zone district or ag zoned. And it's creating a nuisance for the neighbors, the roads, it's tearing up the roadways. And, $250 a day, as Joe said, is a line item in their budget. And it's, cheaper than some of the commercial property out there that requires some of that space. I've seen ag properties that are 5 and 10 acres that they're using the entirety of the property. And for them to find a property that's zoned to allow that is going to cost them way more than $250 a day. So they just see the daily fines as, they're just like, whatever, I'm going to hang on to it, lean it, go ahead and run the daily fines. But if,
which is why I support an increase. Because I'm aware of those, in those places that do that.
Right.
But the increase is draconian. So my request is that it be no greater than 500 per day, and the 50 doesn't go to 5,000, it goes to 2,500. And unless they're doing something illegal, that's going to be punitive enough that they're going to have to stop and take notice. And the irreversibility of up to 15,000 per violation, that be reduced to 7,500, and that it be capped at 50% of the property value. Again, those that may be so operating may not even own the property, which is a problem for the guy that does own the property. So I don't want to belabor this any further. I am able to make a motion.
Yes, sir.
So I am hereby moving on item 4B2, what I just described, that the proposed amounts be diminished by 50%, and that there be a cap of not more than 50% of the assessed value of the land and the property.
I second that motion.
Question, pursuant to your recommendation, you started out by saying that this is pursuant to state statute. We're able to deviate from state statute?
we can go less than, but not
Okay,
above.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Just allowed but not necessary.
Just want to make sure.
Thank you. We have a motion. I have a motion. We got a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
4B3, Sea Turtle.
I will now introduce the code enforcement environmental staff, Carol Liss and Paula Kazan,
Hello, I'm Paula Quezada, Environmental Code Enforcement Specialist.
Pardon me, ma'am, could you speak louder?
Paula Quezada, Environmental Code Enforcement Specialist. The purpose of changing the Sea Trail Conservation Code is to update it to better align with the state of Florida's model lighting ordinance that was passed in 2020. Our current code was last updated in the 90s and references lighting technology that is no longer recommended or even commercially available, which causes confusion for property owners and developers.
All right. So, anyone have any thoughts or questions on this?
I'm far from being an expert.
Yeah,
The only thing that caught my eye was the location of lights at ground level on structures. And I thought structures where these are located are up on stilts. Does the location of these lights have any impact on what we're trying to achieve? And I don't know what I'm asking, but it seemed odd, and maybe it's not because I don't know what I'm talking about.
What section are you looking at? Where are you? The section's a lot of pages, so where are you looking at on that?
Group 3, item B3, page 1 of 10 through the 10 pages.
I know, I was wondering where he's referencing where it's talking about ground level.
While Ray's looking for that, and I defer to the rest of the LPA before I...
Yeah, I'm, like Ray, I'm certainly not a proficient in sea turtle habitat, so I don't know. I mean, reading through this, it kind of made sense. But I guess my question is how does this compare to other coastal counties that experience sea turtle in terms of Collier or Charlotte County, on how they handle it versus what you're proposing here?
So because this is based on Florida's model ordinance, the idea is that eventually all municipalities would adopt their model ordinance. So I'm not sure how it compares to our neighboring counties, but other counties in the state and other municipalities in the state have adopted this ordinance.
I would just bring up on the LDCAC, we have landscape architects on there. We have a planner who works on the beach, and pretty much everyone was in support of these regulations and thought they were consistent.
So a question that I have is, and I have my notes at the amendment summary, if a property owner complied with the regulations as of past date, and these go through, will that property owner then have to further amend their fixturing and lighting?
So these pretty generally already align to what we have. It's just it gives better guidance to how to meet our current regulations. So if a property owner currently has lights that are against this, they're pretty much against our current code as well. The only instance I can think of where they're following the old code and not the proposed code is where they found yellow bug lights somewhere, because those aren't really sold a whole lot. That's what was previously recommended, and I don't think those would meet the light requirements of the new code, but it would just be a matter of changing the bulbs.
My case in point is a hotelier owns a 120-unit hotel on one of these barrier islands. He is conscientious, she's conscientious, he's made these adjustments per the regulations circa whatever. Now these regulations change. He's either unaware or he's already met he doesn't meet the new standard, which kind of goes back to our previous discussion. The code guy comes out and he's waxing him for $2,500 a day.
So in this instance, we would be the code guys, and we kind of want to lead with education before we start getting fines involved.
But can you assess fines if he was compliant prior to this adoption?
I think the point would be that if it's not compliant now, it wouldn't have been compliant with the previous code anyways. The way that we're reviewing and the way that code enforcement is reviewing projects when they go out and do their assessments is they're looking at it as a holistic property as well. If it's got violation lights or lights that are not compliant now, it wouldn't change.
But if they were compliant preceding this adoption, they would not be forced to make further renovations.
No, because the code is technically, it's more so updating the technology of the lights that are provided now. The code references, like Paula had mentioned, bug lights that aren't commercially available anymore. More so, properties are using LED lights. A lot of them are converting to those LEDs or fixed LED lights are adaptable to current fixtures. So if the lights are not compliant with the old code, it would also be not compliant with the new code. It's not going to change I don't think it's going to change the code enforcement aspect.
But if they were compliant with the old code, they don't have to change them. That's the only thing I'm getting to.
Right, as long as they're not changing the lights to be more non-compliant.
Very good.
They would we're still looking at, the aspects of it is still looking at point source of light being shielded, and the correct color of the color spectrum of the light being installed.
Ray, did you?
It had nothing to do with the ground level. It's interior lighting on all glass windows, and it occurred to me that glass windows for the unit is some 12, 16 feet above grade. And is that truly an issue or a problem? But I see you're also covering that the glass on that side of the house has to be tinted, and I guess that works fine for sea turtles.
Thank you, ladies. All right, do I have a motion for 4B3?
I make that motion.
I'll second it.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. 4B4?
All right, so this section is for beach and dune protection. These changes are just to match the changes made in the Sea Turtle Conservation Code because they do reference each other. There's also a change in the way that the dune vegetation species are listed because we've found problems where the common name can reference multiple species, and there's been confusion in that. So we just list the species, as the scientific name is along with the common name.
Any questions for staff on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve B4 as stated.
Don, if I may.
Please.
I'm not sure, as I don't have it designated here, I have it designated in another way. I saw in here that the raking of the beach there was language that was changing when that could commence. And what I recall, and I can probably find it, I believe it's on page 4 of 7. A3, there was a constraint, and the previous one, it gave a time, the earlier of, I believe it was 9 a.m., or when turtle time, volunteer, what have you, was through there, but now it's the later of the turtle time person.
So this is a rule that was in both sections, and they were kind of contradicting each other.
Okay.
So we just went with the simpler of the two, which was one a turtle monitor has gone through, because they do communicate with the resort owners, and they mark off the nests that they've identified, and that'll just prevent any conflict between turtle monitors and resort owners.
So the angst that I have with that, and I've been walking these beaches a couple times a week forever, is there are occasions, not often, when the turtle monitor is there beyond 9 o'clock. And if I'm running a beach concession and I have to set up so many chairs and so many water and I don't get that started, but I have to wait, and who knows, what happened, maybe their car didn't start. I strongly favor that it be the earlier of a turtle monitor or a time certain.
Well, the consequence to that would be the potential of setting up furniture on a nest that was not identified, and that would cause problems legally. So I think this protects the turtles and the owners, really, because they're not trained to identify a sea turtle nest. They can't determine whether they're setting up on one. We had an instance where somebody did set up on, it turned out to be a false crawl, but they didn't see it.
They raked?
No, it was setting up furniture and setting up a booth.
Mm-hmm. Not a hill to die on, but if I'm running 3 employees and the turtle people can't get there by 9 o'clock, and those employees, I haven't trained them to recognize, it's a very distinguishable pattern. It is an unmistakable what it is. And they know that as the owner of the business that there's culpability if they disturb that. I think there should be a hard stop, but again, not enough of consequence for me to belabor the LPA or staff's time, but be aware that happens, that I'm on that beach and those folks aren't showing up by 9 o'clock, and it's a problem. All right. Anyone else? Motion?
I think I made one.
Would you repeat it for the record?
Sir, a recommendation to approve B4 is stated.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? I'm opposed to that. Janet? B5.
I'm Carol Liss with Lee County Code Enforcement, Principal Planner. This section was just an update on the exotic vegetation table. There were several typos, and we added some additional species on that. And then at the end, we also added a section regarding the maintenance of planted dry detention areas. We're having a lot of code violations where people are mowing them down and causing the removal of those, causing code violations. So that's what that is.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion as presented.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are now into subsection C.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Adam Mendez. I'm with the Lee County Zoning Section, here to present to you item C1, which pertains to the hearing examiner's authority in rendering decisions or making recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. As some of you may recall, back in 2022 of May, the hearing examiner's authority was expanded and her decision-making capacity for amendments to plan developments as well as conventional rezonings. That legislation has been test-driven, so to speak, and we have identified some shortcomings as to the intent. The hearing examiner's authority proposed before you pertains particularly to amendments to plan developments where the intensity of the development may not be increased with certain exceptions. In evaluating that, I've provided an example to the previous committees. We just recently heard an amendment through the public hearing process to increase the height of a sign adjacent to 75, and in doing so, because of the definition of intensity being so broad, it had to go before the board, which ended up being a waste of time for most people involved. So the language before you is swapping out the term intensity and replacing it with non-residential floor area, which is going to provide the hearing examiner more latitude to make a final decision if the applicant desires the hearing examiner to make a final decision. If the applicant does not, they can request that the hearing examiner make a recommendation to the board, and then that would be heard before the board, and she would prepare a recommendation as she does currently. So with that, I'm here for any questions.
Questions? We're discussing item 4C1, HEX powers and duties. If there are no questions, do I have a motion?
I have a motion to approve Group 3, item C.1 as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item C2, Right to Farm Act.
Okay, for the record, Anthony Rodriguez. I'll present the next couple of items. Item 4C2 is an amendment to the agricultural use table. Some of you were here back in 2019 when this section was amended to modify the special exception requirement for keeping, raising, or breeding of marine life, which requires the storage of brackish or saline water. Before the code reads as it currently does today, that was a man-made closed system. And what happened is the code was amended to broaden that to require it to either be a man-made closed system or to be something that uses the natural features of land, or if you wanted to dig ponds to facilitate that use, that would have required a special exception. What staff was unaware of at the time is that the Right to Farm Act precludes local governments from placing more stringent regulations on agricultural uses, and so because of that, we have an inconsistency with state statute, and so this code change is going to allow that use by right in agricultural districts consistent with the Right to Farm Act.
Thank you. Any questions of staff on this item? I have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve item C2.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anthony, C3.
Item 4C3 is related to golf course parking requirements in residential communities with a golf course. Current code does not have a parking requirement for that use in a residential community. It only regulates commercial golf courses. So for that reason, staff has traditionally applied parking requirements for non-residential uses in communities with a golf course, which requires other amenities that may include spas, salons, other personal services of that nature to be parked in accordance with non-residential parking requirements, which doesn't make a ton of sense because these are typically not open to the public. So staff is proposing to add a note to section 34-2020A, which establishes parking requirements for residential uses, to require a golf course or a residential community containing a golf course to establish a parking requirement for golf courses, either by hole or by the amount of area in a clubhouse dedicated to a restaurant, whichever is greater. But then it allows other amenities in that facility to be parked at a standard rate of 3.5 spaces per 1,000, which is going to greatly reduce the parking requirement in those instances. Got nothing else. I can answer any questions.
Questions?
I think this is a very helpful code. This has always been very difficult to calculate, so I appreciate the proposals that staff have.
Anyone else? I was curious how the 12.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet was derived.
12.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet is a parking requirement for a restaurant in the non-residential section in 34-2020B. And that's the 12.5 is typically in a multiple use development scenario, so where the restaurant is not the only use on a piece of property. So we're using the lesser standard to apply in this instance.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have a motion on C3?
I'll make a motion to approve item C3.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Ray, thank you. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. 4?
Okay, item 4C4 is striking the one and only cross-reference to the post-disaster ordinance in the Land Development Code. As some of you may be aware, the post-disaster ordinance 07-20, was repealed earlier this year by the Board of County Commissioners, and so this is just a consistency change.
Thank you. Motion?
Motion to approve C4 as stated.
Thank you. Second?
Second?
Thank you, Dustin. Discussion? None. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Joe Adams is going to handle items 5 and 6, and then I'll come back for item 7.
Thank you.
Morning again, Joe Adams with the County Attorney's Office. Item C5 is a change to the code. After the hurricane, it was determined that the floodplain administrator needs to be its own position. The code required the building official to be the floodplain administrator, so that's changing that.
Thoughts, questions? Any challenge that you see in doing that with the?
We already went to the board to basically override this. The floodplain administrator is now its own position, and the board approved that. This is just making the land development code consistent with that direction from the board.
Was that autonomous position in part due to the FEMA challenge of the flood compliance?
Correct. I mean, with the dealing with the aftermath of the hurricane, it was determined that there's a lot there, and it needed to be its own position.
Great, thank you. C5. Any other questions? Motion?
I'll make a motion to approve item C5.
Second?
Second?
Thank you, thank you. No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Item C6 is simply reducing the quorum for the Board of Adjustment Appeals from 7 to 5. We've been having trouble getting a quorum for those meetings.
And the Board of Appeals deals with?
Mostly variance requests relating to building permits. They also, an appeal of the building official can be made by an applicant to the Board of Adjustment and Appeals.
Do they adjudicate code violations?
It does not happen often. It's mostly variance requests.
Is that in their purview?
It is.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff on C6? Motion?
Motion to approve C6 as stated.
Thank you, Don. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Dustin. No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Street names.
All right. Last item for the LDC amendments is street names. This is a change to reflect how streets are named, which typically occurs by public safety and E911 addressing. The code currently says that DCD does it, and that's just not consistent with practice.
Say again, the code currently?
The code currently states that the Department of Community Development handles that function, but that is not consistent with practice. So we're just bringing the code up to consistency with current practice.
Any inflections on Ray's earlier questions about preliminary plat approval and street naming? And is there any confluence there?
I would defer to my subject matter expert.
This is practice.
Right now, the hard part is finding a name.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can't use the same name twice.
Right.
Yeah.
I've tried, and you can't.
Okay. Any for this?
No.
All right. Motion?
I'll make a motion to approve C7 as presented.
Thank you. Second? Thank you, Don. No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So that concludes items A, B, and C. We're into item number 5, Administrative Code 11-4, Turn Lane Deviations.
Good morning, Rob Price again with DOT. We processed an amendment to our Lee County turn lane policy back in August of 2021. It did a lot of good things, but we've also been getting some consistent concerns or questions about certain things. So this is an attempt to clean up further clean up the turn lane policy. Couple things that we're doing. We're clarifying the deviation process. Historically, when I was reviewing traffic studies for DCD, we handled those probably incorrectly as a approval of your traffic impact statement. If it was brought up through the traffic impact statement that you're deviating maybe from the length of the turn lane, we processed it through that procedure. Recently, there's been a lot of ADDs that have been required to handle deviations from the turn lane policy, and our goal is to try to simplify and not require an ADD when you want to deviate from a turn lane length or from a turn lane requirement. So our hope and goal would be that it would be handled through a stipulation of the approval of your traffic impact statement. Another thing that we're trying to accomplish here is we're going to clarify where turn lane analysis is required. There's a lot of concern or question with regards to intersections and where exactly you're supposed to do turn lane analysis. We provided some graphical depictions that I hope are helpful to the applicants. In particular, I want to highlight the second graphic. Our main concern is really the connections of your traffic to the public street network. If you are accessing a private road, quite frankly, I don't really care if you have to put a turn lane on the private street. I want to know whether or not your trips are going to require turn lanes at the intersection to the county street. So that's the way we've been enforcing the turn lane policy. I'm just clarifying it and putting it in writing and showing you via a map where we're expecting turn lanes. If you want to do turn lanes at your private street entrance or intersection, we're totally cool with that. That's optional. Also, another facet that we're trying to accomplish here is we are attempting to encourage developers to perform your turn lane analysis at the first stage of your development. If you can provide a zoning traffic study, your maximum intensity trip generation and assignment of trips to the public roadway network at your first stage, and you can identify the required turn lanes and you get those approved and construct them, whether you construct them at phase one or as a phase of your DO, our offer to you would be that you never have to do turn lane analysis again for that development unless you come in and change your zoning intensity to intensify or increase density. So we're trying to encourage that turn lane analysis to happen at stage one of your development so that we can appropriately have the turn lanes sized and designed. The alternative is this iteration that the developments are going through with cumulative analyses of turn lanes. Our goal is to not have you come in and build a 240-foot long turn lane and then reanalyze it and then have to come and tear the road up again to extend it 25 or 50 feet or 100 feet. So we would like to size the turn lanes based on the highest intensity that you could build. And if that means that we get a couple turn lanes that might be 20 feet, 25 feet longer than ultimately the build out would require, we're okay with that. We just don't want them to be shorter, and we certainly don't want you having to analyze it and then continuously increase the length of the turn lanes. And then the last thing that we tried to clarify is where you measure the turn lanes from. We added a sentence in the definitions under the deceleration lane just to identify that we measure from the start of the radius for the turning movement. So there's not a lot in here, but I know this can be a controversial administrative code. So we wanted to bring it forward to start getting some feedback before we take it to the Board of County Commissioners. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
I'm being told that this could be a problem, and I think it's being overthought. I understand what you're trying to do, and it makes a lot of sense. You want to make sure that a project that's got zoning for X amount of square footage of commercial and residential, that you can accommodate it with left-hand turn lanes. One of the things that occurs is when you get zoning, oftentimes, you've got a property zoned for more density and square footage that can actually be built on the project. So I can understand you want to see what the turn lanes would be for that development because it's zoned, but you're not looking to have what it's zoned, your first stage, what it's zoned for to provide the right and left-hand turns built according to that, right? I mean,
My proposal would be, if you do that, then you don't have to do turn lane analysis ever again as you develop the different phases of that development. So while we acknowledge that maybe your turn lane analysis will show an additional 25 feet beyond what you ultimately build out, it's safer. We're providing additional stacking. There's nothing that says you can't provide longer turn lanes than what's required. So we're saying there's no chance, depending on how you develop, that you could exceed that turn lane length at that point in time. So if you do the turn lane analysis based on your zoning study, you are going to be exempt from having to review turn lanes at each individual phase of your development.
well, my question is, it doesn't have to be, it can be built in phases.
The turn lane?
Yes.
Would you want to do that? I mean, we would prefer not to have you come in and build a 200-foot turn lane and then come back later and build 50 feet.
Here's an example. Let's say that the project can do 5,000 homes and a couple 100,000 square feet of commercial use. That's going to require X amount of length on the turn lanes. But as you go with the project, you end up with half the commercial, a couple thousand units less than what it's zoned. Personally, I would want to build what would accommodate at least the first DO and add to it as you go.
So you are perfectly capable of doing a turn lane analysis specifically based on each phase that you submit. But then you're going to have to do a subsequent turn lane analysis at every phase of your development. I'm trying to incentivize you saying, okay, look, this is what our zoning says we can build. We understand that you're not necessarily going to build up to that number of units or square footage, but this is what your land is entitled for. So if you build those turn lanes at that first phase, you never have to review it again through all the different phases of your DO. If you choose to do it on a by DO basis, there will be a requirement for you to do cumulative analysis every time that you come in and you're accessing a roadway to look at the total trips. Again, we understand the question. I don't think it's as big of a problem. I mean, having a turn lane, chances are you're building closer to your intensities and your densities. So we're talking about 25 or maybe 50 feet of additional turn lane length. And we are willing to work with developers on the timing of when those turn lanes go in, just like we are on traffic signals. So if what you're telling us is, look, this is what's required and what we're going to put in our first DO, but we want to phase it because we're not building this driveway connection to the county street yet. We're totally comfortable with phasing that out, turn lane going in at a later date. But we just...
I understand what you're trying to, and it makes sense.
Okay.
But as this is written, it's an either or for the developer, right?
Correct. It's at your discretion.
Any other questions?
I just would add, I think that this incentive, program in this really is more applicable to a zoning case where you know for sure who the end user is. I think it really affects that smaller developer who, and that is a cost savings to them to not have to review that traffic analysis twice, where those smaller projects that matters more each cost. I think a larger zoning cases, there's so much flexibility built into those. But I think it really is helpful for the known end user during zoning, and it helps them move quicker too.
Anyone else? All right. Very good. Thank you. Asking for a motion on item number 5, Administrative Code.
Make a motion to approve Administrative Code 11-4 as stated.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any other business from staff before we go further? All right, and you and I have chatted the last couple of meetings. How are we looking for August?
Well, when we saw today's agenda, we did take an LPA or a CPA case off that, so I am expecting two cases next month. It's just been a busy summer for us.
It has been, yeah. And do we know what date that would be?
It's a normal, yeah, Janet, go ahead.
Okay. And you're out? I'm out. Okay. Joe, what do we do when the chairman and the vice chairman are out?
Typically, it would be if there's anybody who's served the longest, it would be them or a volunteer basis. Are we going to have a quorum, Janet? Do we know?
What do we need for the quorum? 5? 4?
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
All right, then we'll deal with that when it comes, but you were thinking August 26th? Okay. All right. Well, staff, great job. Love the objectives and the overviews. They really help. Love to see it getting streamlined and efficient, and thank you for the dialogue, and my apologies for omitting that one staff opportunity. So we are adjourned. Thank you.